Hey, hello everyone. Be starting momentarily. Seems like we've got a good connection today. Okay. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Okay, doing a series on the uh, the scriptures, the Buddhist literature, and today I want to talk about the Four Nikayas. As most of you probably know, there are five Nikayas, but you'll see this phrase, the Four Nikayas, often used because there are four principal Nikayas, and there's one additional one, the Khuddaka Nikaya, that I'll deal with next week because it's kind of different. Now, what do we mean by Nikayas? The Pali scriptures, the Pali canon, is divided into three pitakas, baskets. It's the literal translation. The main divisions is the Sutta Pitaka, Vinaya Pitaka, and Abhidhamma Pitaka. The Sutta Pitaka, which is the record of the Buddha's discourses, is then further divided into what are called Nikayas. These are the main divisions of the Sutta Pitaka. The word Nikaya simply means like a group, and it more normally refers to a group of persons organized for some reason. For example, even the present day in Thailand, the largest section of the Bhikkhu Sangha is called the Mahanakai, which is the big Nikaya. And how it got applied to the divisions of the Sutta Pitaka is because of the long period of 200 to 300 years during which the scriptures were passed on orally by the process of chanting in groups, which I talked a little bit about last week. And the bhikkhus of the time would be organized into a Nikaya that would be responsible for preserving one of these divisions. And they would all together, the monks, which might be a few dozen, staying together, would chant one section, perhaps one sutta, maybe a section of a sutta in the case of the longer suttas, every day, and work through in the course of about a year. The aim generally was to work through the whole Nikaya in about a year, then start again, to preserve the teachings by group chanting. There's an anecdote in the Visuddhimagga, a story about two monks meeting, and the start of their conversation, when they're kind of introducing themselves, one says that he's a Digha reciter. His group chanted the Digha Nikaya, and the other monk says, I'm a Majjhima man myself. And the Digha Nikaya monk says, I don't envy you. That Majjhima is so hard. You just get through the first 50 and you have to start on the second 50. Meaning, 50 suttas in a group. So this was an established practice at the time. So we still have today the Four Nikayas. Um, they are Digha Nikaya, English name Long Discourses, Majjhima Nikaya, Middle Length Sayings, and Gutra Nikaya, Numerical Discourses, and Samyutta Nikaya, Connected Discourses. Now we have at present we have we're fortunate to have very good translations of these into English, mostly by Bhikkhu Bodhi. His translations are very clear and lucid, and he furnishes each volume with a lot of useful apparatus like indexes and introductions and copious footnotes. So his work has been very great benefit to anyone wanting to study the scriptures. The Digha Nikaya is the only one that's not of these four that is not translated by him. What we have is the translation by Maurice Walsh, and this has been in existence for many decades. All of these volumes are published by by Wisdom Publication. Now here's an example. This is the Samyutta Nikaya, the Connected Discourses, in a 2-volume set. It's 2 volumes this size, and so it's quite lengthy. Each Nikaya has its own particular flavor. And Bhikkhu Bodhi, in the introduction to one of his volumes, he presents an idea that these collections each has a kind of specific purpose. The Digha Nikaya, the Long Discourses, what he believes was intended as a kind of a missionary text that would be given to individuals who are new to Buddhism, or to introduce them to Buddhism. The Digha Nikaya contains a few of the very important suttas, like the Brahmajala Sutta, which deals with the 62 wrong views, and the Mahasatipatthana Sutta, which is the 4 foundations of mindfulness, which is a kind of a foundation text for later meditation schools. It also has a great wealth of narrative material. Most prominent here would be the Mahaparinibbana Sutta, the quite lengthy sutta detailing the Buddha's last days, the passing of the Buddha, which is a very moving document. So that Digha Nikaya, as I say, was intended as an introductory text. Majjhima Nikaya gets into more, quite a bit more, let's say, detail, and a little bit more profound in some of the suttas. And the idea of Bhikkhu Bodhi's idea of the purpose of this text was for those who were already committed to the Dhamma, who wanted to study and learn more. In Gutra Nikaya, the numerical discourses are arranged in by numbers from 1 to 11. You probably notice that in Buddhist discourses there's a lot of lists, that 4 of this, 5 of that, 7 of something else. The entire Gutra Nikaya is arranged like that. There's a book of 1s, 2s, 3s, 4s, etc. And each sutta, generally the suttas are fairly short here. There's a few that are a bit longer, but there'll be lists of factors or ideas that can be encapsulated into a list of 4, 5, 6, 7, etc. And the idea for this text is that it was intended as a teacher's manual, that it would provide like a reference, a handy reference to these different collections of factors and so on. And I found this useful myself. If I have to give a talk and I'm stuck for what I want to talk about, sometimes I'll pick up the Angutara and flip through it and look for a list that I can expand upon. Finally, there's the Samyutta Nikaya, which is kind of the grad school text. It's much more technical. In some places, it approaches Abhidhamma in its technicalities. There's much less narrative material. There's some, but much less, and it's arranged topically. A lot of the suttas are very short, so there's very many of them, and they'll be arranged in there's a section on dependent origination, a section on the sense bases, and so on. So this is an overview of the Four Nikayas. Now, a word about the translations. As I said, Bhikkhu Bodhi's translations I would unreservedly recommend. They're quite good. But of course, one should always be aware that no translation can be absolutely perfect, because, as I tried to explain last time, no two languages are fully isomorphic. You're not going to be able to map one language onto another one-to-one. Each has its own grammar and its own vocabulary. And we see this with a lot of words from the Pali that don't have precise English equivalents. Dukkha is famous, a lot of discussion about that. The Maurice Welsh's translation of the Digha, while it's quite good in its own way, it's actually looser. It's not as precise. Maurice Welsh seemed to want to produce something with a literary effect. An example comes to mind from the Mahaparinibbana Sutta, the Sutta of the Buddha's last days, where when the Buddha tells Ananda, we're going to go to Kusinagara to that's where I will enter Parinibbana. Ananda protests. He doesn't want the Buddha to pass away in some backwoods place. He thinks he should go to a big city where many people can attend to him. And the Pali is a literal translation of the Pali would be this Kusinara is a small remote jungle village. And Maurice Welsh translates it as this little place of wattle and daub out in the back of beyond. It's quite a poetic phrase, but it's not literal. And there's quite a bit of this in Maurice Welsh's style. He kind of wants to make a literary effect in the language. I don't think he's done any damage to the actual teachings in this, but you should be cautious of that. If you want to see a more literal translation, the older translation by Rice Davids is published by the Polytext Society. If you can get a hold of it, those books are kind of hard to get and they're pretty expensive. But it's a much more literal translation. Rice Davids was a very excellent translator. the Majjhima Nikaya translation by Bhikkhu Bodhi is, you'll see it credited to Bhikkhu Bodhi and Nyanamoli. This is because he was working, this is the first translation he produced, first major translation, let's say. And he was working from an older translation that his teacher, Nyanamoli, who translated the Visuddhimagga, had left at the time of his death. He had partially translated the Majjhima Nikaya. And that work has actually been published. Again, I think it's hard to find these days, but it's been superseded by Bhikkhu Bodhi's work anyway. So he incorporated that translation and updated some things and completed it. The last of the Nikayas that he translated, Bhikkhu Bodhi, was the Anguttara, and the footnotes that he provides are particularly interesting here because by this time he had studied Chinese, and he does a lot of comparison with the Agamas, which is a collection of texts preserved only in Chinese from probably Dharmagupta school, from another one of the early schools of Buddhism. So the comparison, and Bhikkhu Anelio has also done some work in this regard, comparing the Agamas to the suttas in Pali is a good piece of scholarship for determining which material may be later additions, because if the same phrasing and the same material occurs in both the Pali and the Chinese Agamas, then we can have a high degree of confidence that it's at least as old as the Second Council, which is 100 years after the Buddha's time, which is when the schools split and went their separate ways. So anything that's the same would have been older than that. And anything that's different is probably an addition that was added in later. And it turns out the agreement between the two is by and large very consistent. And Bhikkhu Bodhi makes note of the few places where there is differences. Now, as to those who wish to study the suttas, the general advice is to start with the Digha Nikaya, because it has the most, it's the most approachable. In some ways, it's the easiest, because it was the beginner's text, after all. And it also contains some of the most important suttas and teachings, the basic teachings. And then to follow that with the Majjhima, and then to go into the Anguttara and Samyutta as you see fit. As far as the Majjhima Nikaya goes, it can be a little bit daunting if you pick it up and try to read it cover to cover, because the very first sutta is one of the most difficult. And this is a general thing you'll see in the except with the exception of the Samyutta Nikaya, the other three, they're not arranged. Well, the Anguttara is arranged by numbers, but they're not arranged by topics, or it's very hard to see why they. And I don't think anyone really has a good explanation for how they ended up in the order that they are, why they're arranged in such a way. It's not chronological. And it's not arranged by topics. It seems rather random, the order of the suttas. Another issue that you'll encounter when you're studying the suttas is the numbering system and the references. This is kind of a difficulty that with the Pali Canon. in this regard, we can be a bit envious of our Christian friends. They have a very good numbering system. If somebody says John 13:6, that'll be standard across all Bibles, and you can find the exact sentence quickly. Whereas there's all sorts of difficulties and issues with the numbering system of the Pali Canon. This is for one thing, one of the problems is that the order of the suttas is in particularly in the Samyutta, somewhat different between the Burmese recension and the Sinhalese recension, the Sri Lankan version. They're same suttas, but the orders change here and there, and this can create a problem. The on the most readily accessible digital Pali version that's put out by the Goenka people, it's very, very good work that they've done. It follows the Burmese recension. But the translations into English by Bhikkhu Bodhi generally follow the ordering of the Sinhalese recension. So it's cross-referencing the two can sometimes be a bit confusing. Also, there isn't any real standard for, particularly for the Samyutta Nikaya, this becomes difficult. There's, I've seen in recent years they're kind of establishing a new standard for numbering references to the Samyutta, but there's still older versions out there that are confusing. One thing you may see, particularly in older books, there's an older numbering system that's used right across the Pali Canon that I find it, I don't like it, but it was standard for many years, is to reference the page numbers of the Pali Text Society Pali version. And you'll see this in, for example, in Bhikkhu Bodhi's translations, you'll see square brackets interspersed in the text with a number. That's what this is referring to. So you can reference that older system if you see a reference in a book that says Majjhima 132. That what that means is page 132 in the Pali Text Society Pali version. And you can still work backwards from that using the square bracket system that you see in the modern translations. But that's just something. It's just something we have to live with. Is the numbering system is not as simple and easy in the Pali Canon. Other translations or versions out there, you'll on accesstoinsight.org, they have a collection. It's not a complete by any means, but they have a pretty extensive collection of translated suttas mostly by Thanissaro Bhikkhu, and they're quite good as well, and they're readily accessible and free. There's also complete translations, the older translations by the Pali Text Society. They were pioneering translations done as early as the late 19th century in some cases. And they can be ordered by mail from the Pali Text Society, and they're quite expensive. And as I said, the ones by Rice Davies are very good. Some of the other ones are not as good now. They've been superseded. But that's another version that's out there. So I think that's about all I really intended to say today about the Four Nikayas, and I'll address some remarks next week on the Khuddaka Nikaya, which includes texts as various as the Sutta Nipata and the Jatakas, and so on. And we'll talk about that next week. So let's go and see what we got in the chat, if there's anything that I can address there. What order would you recommend reading Nikaya? So I think I already answered that. Start with the Diga, then go on to the Majjhima. Would you recommend reading straight through or taking more time with each sutta? I think it doesn't hurt to go through them, reading them through the first time, without pausing too much, and then digest them, go through them again more slowly. What about the early material from the Khuddha Nikaya? We'll discuss that next week. Yes, some of the material is considered to be quite early, and some of it's quite late. It's a real mixed bag. Is it possible to have a devotional bhakti relation to Gautama Buddha in the same way others relate to Christ, Krishna, or Avalokiteshvara? I'm interested in developing the devotional side. Any advice? There is a devotional aspect to Theravada Buddhism. It's not emphasized. It's not primarily a bhakti tradition, you would say, but having an altar with a statue of the Buddha, bowing, lighting incense, chanting, these are all practices that are classified as devotional, and they're widely done in Theravada Buddhism. See, I recently watched one of your videos on Majjhima 49. I was curious to know about Mara in the sutta. He seems to be unaware of who the Buddha is. Could this be Mara from another world system? No, it's not Mara of this world system. I think Mara. I think it took him some time to figure out that the Buddha was completely enlightened. He kept trying to tempt the Buddha or bother him. Difficult for him to accept, I suppose, as someone had accepted, had escaped from his snares. Why doesn't Mahayana prioritize the Nikayas? Now, they've got their own very extensive literature of the Mahayana sutras that they're in which their teachings are preserved. So the general Mahayana position on the Nikayas is that they represent a more elementary level of teaching. It's superseded by the higher teachings of the Mahayana. Hi Monty, why is the first sutta on Digha Nikaya difficult to understand? No, I said the first sutta in Majjhima Nikaya. If you look at it for yourself, it's a very philosophical sutta, the Mullapariyaya Sutta, and it deals with the way experience is cognized by the unenlightened person, by the stream winner, and by the Arahant, and the different ways that they experience reality. And it's at a pretty advanced philosophical level. How often do you encounter monks who have memorized an entire Nikaya? I've not personally known anyone who's done that. I've known monks who memorized several suttas. There are in Asia, in Burma particularly, it's a practice that's often done, that they'll memorize extensive, even up to a whole Nikaya. It's not, because now we have printing and writing, it's not necessary as it was in the early days. Is there any translation that skips over repetitive elements of suttas? I appreciate its function and memorization can make reading challenging at times. Well, Maurice Welsh's translation of the Diga does skip a lot of the repetitive passages. Uh, the There is a value in the repetitions, and it kind of prints it into the mind. And I mean, you can always, if you're quite free when you're reading it to skim or skip the repetitions. That's an interesting topic, and two Maras from different world systems converge and meet simultaneously. I don't think there's any case of that in any of the stories about Mara. There are stories about Devas from 10,000 world systems converging to hear a teaching of the Buddha, or to attend on the Buddha when he went into Mahaparinibbana. So there is some crossover between world systems, but I've not seen it in the case of Mara. Are there worldly prerequisites to entering jhana for lay people? For example, something like meeting most of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. I don't think so. I think it's just the ability to shut out the demands of the sense bases for a while. Do you have a personal favorite Nikaya? That's hard to say. An entire Nikaya. I do have favorite suttas, but maybe if I had to just pick, if I had to pick one Nikaya that can only have one volume, stuck on a desert island with one volume, I would say Majjhima Nikaya. What is a conducive enough environment in which a layperson can reliably develop jhana practice? Well, the more seclusion and quiet, the better. It's kind of as much as you can manage. Having a lot of not having a lot of worldly cares and troubles and things to attend to. Okay, so I think that comes to the end of that, and we'll next week we'll come back and talk about the Khuddaka Nikaya, which is I think an interesting topic. So a lot of material to discuss there. Okay, see you next time.